Hey y'all. So this is a presentation that I actually gave in Norway virtually for the Emerging Therapies Conference on the U campus in St. Paul. And I was going to use that recording for Patreon, but the recording didn't save, so I will just redo the lecture for you guys. And this was geared towards therapists that are interested in psychedelics as a therapy. So just kind of with that lens in mind, I will get into psychedelic climate, community, and co-cultivation. So for the agenda, I'm going to be first talking about Big Psych, who we are, our mission and offerings, which most of you kind of already know. Then we'll move into psychedelic climate, free-range experimentation, the domestication of psychedelics, and mainstream impact, and then the psychedelic community, the underground space, social responsibility, and community-based care, and then closing with co-cultivation, psychedelic activism, grassroots movements, and diversity of thought. So, starting with Big Psych. So Big Psych is a psychedelic activist and education organization, and we support everyday people in the community by cultivating a relationship with plant medicine. We value the ability to translate and integrate your own teachings as a practice of self-sufficiency and prioritize access to and representations of the diverse approaches to psychedelic exploration. We protect free speech by activating discussions that center diversity of thought, explore the dimensions of morality, and simply practice respectful conversation. This is the rest of our team who we met while organizing our first psychedelic symposium in 2021, and together we began exploring future plans regarding legislation, education, accessibility, and sustainability in the Minnesota psychedelic community. Building psychedelic community through fellowship, activism, and education. So this is sort of a mission for us and reflection of our community. We don't market our spaces as a healing center or space to receive healing. This is a community of activists that utilize fellowship as education. Many of us are pursuing a healing journey, and we share stories, opinions, and really question each other, which just naturally builds friendship. We value how our lived experiences foster a diverse palette of experiences that really connect us to the sense of community. We all have a relationship with these plant medicines, and we advocate for that relationship. So these are some of our main offerings. Our first event was an open mic at the Larry Cafe in North Minneapolis. And this was during the uprising and the juxtaposition of the fully decked out military officers and their armored vehicles right across the street while we are gathering for community fellowship, really set the tone as people kind of migrated into this space. And these monthly gatherings started as a safe place to discuss psychedelics and share experiences. And then as the space evolved and as we evolved, it became a space to cognitively deconstruct and rebuild with intention, which is always how I describe psychedelics, to be seen in your growth and exploration of self. We activate discussions that cause people to question their belief system and really offer space outside of comfort in many ways. We found that too often spaces place limits on natural expression and questioning. We practice respectful conversation in the face of disagreement and allow room for those questions to be held and explored. We found political correctness to be a barrier in our spaces that did not lend to digging deep in those realms of morality or honoring diversity of thought. And this deep programming of conformity was the next chapter of unlearning for us, being able to welcome all with differing opinions and truly hold spaces of adversity with grace. Our discussions center much of what I'll be discussing today, from psychedelic elitism to spiritual bypassing to accountability, ethics, and boundaries in the psychedelic space. And this event is held at New Rules in North Minneapolis the first Sunday of every month. Our cultivation workshops are our newest offering, and these classes are more catered to folks who want to be fully self-reliant in their cultivation practice. My husband Steve covers the entire process as it pertains to psilocybin mushrooms and really teaches a relatable form of craft cultivation that prioritizes a symbiotic relationship with fungi. We're really grateful for these first round of successful workshops and look forward to building this community of cultivators here in Minneapolis. Stieg is also this past year's exotic mushroom champion at the Psilocybin Cup, so he specializes in mushrooms that you have probably never even heard of before. This is another practice of transparency for us because many of the cultivation workshops that we've seen in the past are kind of under the guise of gourmet mushroom cultivation, and we massage that boundary a bit by being open with our education courses to increase that accessibility and normalize the conversation. And finally, we have our symposium. So this will be our third annual Psychedelic Symposium at the Capri Theater in North Minneapolis. This is where I grew up going to theater in the summer and where Prince played his first show. So I don't know which is more exciting for you guys, but it's quite the historic theater and a beautiful space to host our conference. We have speakers from throughout the U.S. to offer educational psychedelic resources that support individual autonomy and freedom of exploration. Okay, on to psychedelic climate. Free range experimentation. So I coined this term when describing my journey as a free agent in the psychedelic space. I, like many folks in the community, began my journey in a more recreational setting, guided by intuition and experimental intake of psychedelics versus a particular ritual, ancestral lineage, or passed down through cultural and traditional ties. So listed here are the many psychedelics and entheogens that people begin their journey with. More commonly, I would say LSD, mushrooms, cannabis, and MDMA. And some people, like myself, however, more around the 2014 era, were introduced through research chemicals or designer drugs such as the NBOM or 2C family. So for me, it was 2CE. And the 2C family is a derivative of mescaline, which is the psychoactive compound found in cacti native to southwestern US and northern Mexico called peyote. So these designer drugs caused quite the stir back in my high school days. They were often sold as LSD, but they had a much stronger visual effect and also a much lower lethal dose. So kids would be taking 25I, thinking it was LSD, and having lethal consequences. So it was phased out after word spread about the deaths. LSD is tasteless and has no scent, and the research chemicals tasted like toxic bathroom cleaner that made your mouth go numb. So we knew that if you tasted anything, to spit it out immediately. So there's a little insight into the underground recreational scene when I was a teenager. You never really knew what you were getting, and our harm reduction protocol was, if it's bitter, it's a spitter. So some people stuck with the psychedelic party scene, and others transitioned to the spiritual sector of psychedelia. Some, like myself, found themselves studying psychology, neuroscience, or chemistry at university, and some even cultivating the medicine themselves. Many pathways and outcomes blossoming from this shared experience. The internet also contributed to the psychedelic boom in the mainstream. When I was in high school, there was no easily accessible information on psychedelics, and the first thing I heard about them was that you would taste colors and see sounds. It was a leap of faith into the unknown. And today there's an abundance of shared experiences, methodologies, and theories on psychedelics. The topic is rather socially accepted now that respected sectors of society have begun to openly welcome them into their culture, such as academia and Silicon Valley. We see it all over Hollywood, music, fashion industries. Many people are coming out of the psychedelic closet and normalizing. In the last 10 years, we've seen a significant shift both politically and culturally. And something I find of interest is that societal shift and the effects of it. How does it impact the psychedelic experience, the community, and the evolution of our world? Again, these are the type of topics we dive into during our psychedelic open mics. Okay, domestication. So this leads to our next topic, domestication, another concept we've coined in the context of analyzing psychedelic culture. You may be more familiar with this term in reference to animals or food domestication. As you know, we domesticate these resources to make them more resourceful by enhancing their edible components, taming, and overall making them better applicable for our human needs. We see this same process happening with psychedelics. And I want to make it clear that I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, simply sharing an observation and questioning the impact. So I have two concepts here, the domestication of psychedelics themselves and the experiences they produce. Domestication of psychedelics is what we see today with many medicines derived from plants, such as poppy or coca leaves. They become clinically examined, medically applied, and extracted for specific uses. They make their way through the industrial process and are often exploited within our capitalist society. We can see the same phenomenon happening socially with the psychedelic experience. As more experiences and opinions are shared, the experience becomes defined before people can define it for themselves. We're flooded with approach propaganda, academic studies, media influence, medical influence, that we begin to shape rather than receive the experience. The experience is so sensitive to influence that simply hearing about someone else's experience can give you a similar effect or have your brain interpret the experience the same way. So when we attempt to replicate processes and develop one systematic approach, we are essentially domesticating the experience. This, on one hand, has the potential to hinder the experience by establishing a container of exploration rather than the full potentiality. On the other hand, you are able to manipulate the experience with therapeutic intention, establish a therapeutic container, and guide the reflections as a therapeutic professional. Anyone can cultivate and eat a mushroom. This is part of that accessibility factor with psychedelics as medicine. The ability to build a relationship with your medicine, connect to nature, and be an active part of your own pursuit of healing. The connection to nature is often why people trend towards psychedelics in the first place, and I do question how psychedelics outside of this context shifts the experience when we transition from a more naturally occurring environment to a clinical one. And that's not to say that there cannot be both. There's simply a different culture present, a different methodology, and both deserve to exist legally. So now that we've made our way a little closer to the present, we can go over some of the newer evolutions of psychedelic space. First, we'll be touching on microdosing, then psychedelic healers, psychedelic tourism, and psychedelic legislation. So this is a graphic on how to microdose psilocybin. I define microdosing as taking small microdoses of a substance that offers healing properties. This is often a subperceptual effect that acts as a mood stabilizer. You can microdose with pretty much any substance, but we hear about it most often with psilocybin mushrooms. And this is a loose guide to developing a microdosing practice. Since the effects are so relative, so are the doses and preferred impact of those doses, ranging from subperceptual to slight perceptual effects. There are many guides out there that have developed rigid rituals, so I encourage people to do the research, experiment, and find what works best for you. Microdosing, I feel, in part supported the big mainstream psychedelic boom. I hadn't even heard of the concept until a few years back when I first heard of it. I thought it was a bit contradictory, I typically took macrodoses that stuck with me for quite some time. And my favorite part of the experience was the perceptual effect. So why on earth would I want a subperceptual experience? It was a foreign concept for both my husband and I, but we decided to try it out anyways. And we started it out in the summer in 2021, and we both loved it. Our preferred dose was around 0.2 to 0.5 grams, depending on the mushroom. And it just gave us this element of bubbly euphoria and warmth. And we had a pretty irregular practice and took it intuitively, as we do most things. And my personal practice kind of tapered off in the winter months, which I found to be very interesting. As seasonal depression began to settle in, I was less motivated to microdose and hesitant about it enhancing my lower mood. Both work kind of. Although every time I did manage to microdose, it did make me feel better, and I was happy that I made that choice. So this experience brought into question for me what motivates the act of change when resources such as plant medicine are available. What is that factor of motivation and drive for consistency? I found that for some folks, the ritual of taking a microdose daily, weekly, whatever the routine, made the mushroom feel like a pharmaceutical, an ibuprofen or antidepressant that does the work for you rather than act as a catalyst for reflection and offer teachings that you then practice and integrate into your life to manifest healing. I actually had to suggest to several people that were struggling with their practice to consider taking pause and focusing on their integration, because the medicine is only part of the journey. So perhaps the answer to my previous question, for some of course, is a psychedelic healer. Psychedelic healers have many names: facilitator, shaman, psychedelic therapist, trip sitter, and so on. They are people who offer support, healing, and or facilitation services for others to experience psychedelics and oftentimes integrate their experiences. This is likely where many of you have interest. In our community, the culture of healers feels more integrated into the community. Sure, there are some licensed therapists, doctors, and psychiatrists, but much of it comes in the form of friendship and mentorship. We're grateful for the intergenerational diversity we have in the community, and it really adds an element of balance to our spaces. The simplicity of lived experience and valuing diversity of thought is a great learning tool. It feels like an effortless, holistic support system that is built into the culture. In our community, we lay caution to systems of dependency, and healers being one of them. Being dependent on a person to translate and reflect your teachings rather than learning directly from the plant as your teacher and exercising that practice of translation yourself. We want people to be mindful, especially with the huge influx of psychedelic guru type personas, of potential for exploitation. The psychedelic space is still in a defining era with limited regulatory infrastructure and accountability systems. So you have any and everyone coming out with self-made credentials and the one and only path to enlightenment. Sharing experiences and offering support is one thing, but scheming people with promises of healing, manipulation, cultism, and abuse of power is another, all of which we've seen throughout the psychedelic space. This is why our philosophy emphasizes self-sufficiency, building a direct relationship with plant medicine, and welcoming all approaches and ideas to the space so people have the resources to choose their own path. I've noticed a trend of reservation in the spiritual community, for example, when it comes to the Western medical system. Many have been burned by the system and have trauma-related fears of the medical system, so they explore other modalities of healing through other cultures and spiritual practices. Now, the blend of Western culture and psychedelics offers a unique meld of ideologies. Both can exist at the same time, learning from one another and building anew. And there is caution of exploitation and extraction. The medical system extracting from the community solely to commodify and industrialize, creating an imbalance both structurally and morally with the community and the developing industry. As we've seen with cannabis, poppy, coca, and other plant medicine, it makes sense why the community is weary of medical intentions. On the other hand, the medical approach offers to our legal system legitimacy, scientific data, and academic testimony that pushes the broader movement forward. But in what direction? Another development in the mainstream culture is psychedelic tourism, traveling specifically to seek a psychedelic experience from a land or culture. These are the most common areas for psychedelic tourism. Jamaica, because psychedelic mushrooms have actually never been regulated, so some companies have been setting up operations and retreats there. And then with Mexico and Peru, the medicine grows naturally, and it is an integrated part of their history and culture and spiritual traditions. So people travel to experience a ceremony with a shaman from these regions where the medicine is native to. Some say the tourism is good for the community and offers financial support, while others critique the harmful impact on the land. Again, that relationship of extraction and taking from the environment and the people without replenishing or giving back. Feeling as though Westerners are destroying the local infrastructure and culture of these smaller communities, shifting not only the flow of currency, but the local medical system of these communities, because for them, it's not some exotic wellness retreat, but a lifestyle and tradition. Maria Sabina, for example, who actually introduced the Western world to psilocybin mushrooms, was shunned by her community for doing so, and in her years pretty isolated. Here she's kind of a legend, but back home she lived an exiled life in many ways. And there are many different perspectives on this topic, and it's just always a good practice to do some research and reflect on your intention when entering spaces like these. Okay, so on to psychedelic legislation. So I have two definitions here: decrim, which is the action or process of ceasing to treat something as illegal or as a criminal offense, and legalization, the act of making something that was previously illegal permissible by law. Now, this is not my area of expertise. However, I am engaged with this language when it comes to psychedelics and the future of the community. With decrim, there is the argument that it is mostly symbolic and does not add any real protection for those in the community. It's also often only centered around some folks in the community, such as practitioners and those who take psychedelics, leaving those who cultivate and distribute psychedelics out of the picture, though you cannot have one without the other. Decrim puts psychedelics as the lowest priority, and therefore police are still able to use their discretion to engage with the matter. So again, there is high concern that only some folks will be protected. Communities who tend to be more criminalized by the system are left unprotected. With legalization, there is a concern that big pharma and larger corporations will monopolize the space, leaving grassroots organizations who fought for the liberation of plant medicine the least to benefit from their work. Legalization often brings a financial disadvantage to the communities with high licensing fees, complex regulatory expectations built by folks who are not even educated on plant medicine or their requirements, and felony limitations which prevent people who were previously criminalized from entering the very industry they were arrested for. So, which approach is most equitable? It's hard to say. I do not believe in one without the other, or rather one over the other, because if there is just legalization, then it is essentially legalizing one model and one approach to psychedelics, the Western medical model, which invalidates the underground professional world and systems already in place. It's a complex position integrating psychedelics into our society. It's bringing out essential reflections for our society as we navigate morality, capitalism, our healthcare system, and spiritual beliefs. Okay, so on to community. So, the underground space is made up of all types of people, from professors to state reps to families and cultivators. What happens underground is sustainable, accessible support and education. We support building a direct relationship with medicine through cultivation and conversation. So there's pros and cons to an underground space. Less defined formal regulation allows creativity to roam free, and there's consistent innovation and community building happening. On the other hand, accessibility and ethical standards become skewed. This is why our community discusses the concept of social responsibility. Social responsibility is defined here as an ethical theory in which individuals are accountable for fulfilling their civic duty, and the actions of an individual must benefit the whole of a society. In this way, there must be a balance between economic growth and the welfare of society and the environment. When many folks outside of the underground space conceptualize it, it may look like a free-for-all, raunchy, unregulated mess. But this is not the case. Having social responsibility be an expectation and pillar of these underground spaces offers some form of accountability and semi-regulatory system. Our practice of social responsibility largely falls under education. We believe diverse education on psychedelic practice, philosophies, culture, and everything in between allows the community to be protected and empowered with knowledge to be independent agents of their own wellness journey. These are some of the topics we explore at our events. Emergency protocol, honesty, currency exchange, healthy boundaries, approach propaganda and bias, dosage, natural law, accountability ethics, intention, medical potency or medicinal potency, fungal species literacy, forms of exploitation, integration, professionalism, and so many more. We try to empower our community with this psychedelic literacy and definitely consider this to be our social responsibility. Community-based care. So my husband, Steve, and I officially launched Big Psych in 2020 during the pandemic. I was graduating from the U in 2020 and on lockdown, so we finally had the time to put towards our passion project that we had been manifesting for years. At this point, Big Psych had a name and years of reflection that we intended to infuse into a space that we felt welcomed by, seen in, and heard. We had been to conferences here and there, but nothing that felt representative of our experience. Nowhere that felt open and accessible. We were determined and motivated by our own personal relationship with psychedelics, experiencing firsthand the internal transformation and potential for healing. This was enough grit to really propel our movement forward and bring the conceptual into physical reality. Big Psych was not only a space for community to come together, but really a learning tool for Stieg and I. We had been exploring psychedelics, just the two of us, for so long that we needed to remember how to socialize again and connect these powerful experiences to the community around us, the community we were hoping to build. We began facing our social fears and integrating our years of psychedelic exploration into our social lives, a whole different sphere of self to learn from. Big Psych was the next step in our psychedelic journey, growing into advocates and sharing stories from our personal journeys. What we have seen and been through with psychedelics, and creating space for others to do the same, creating a platform for the people. We tapped into the power of honesty and transparency. To speak freely and openly about our wellness journey felt like a natural-born right. Freedom of speech and freedom to heal, something that shouldn't be shunned or criminalized. So finally, we are on to Co-Cultivation and big psychedelic activism. So our form of psychedelic activism really embodies transparency. We define it as transparent and open advocacy through discourse, cultivation, and solidarity. In high school, we questioned psychedelic concealment, and as we got older, we really began to advocate for freedom of choice in the exploration of our own minds. As the space continues to evolve and groups express their methods, we need to remember that there is no single way to trip. You can follow your own path and develop your own techniques outside of mainstream or traditional practice. Be mindful of your needs and cultivate a practice that reflects your unique experience. Our activism looks like sharing our story openly and creating platforms and spaces for others to do the same. It involves promoting sustainable internal and external infrastructure for a successful psychedelic practice and learning from one another. Solidarity amongst the plant medicine community is something we are evolving into as well, branching outside of our local community just as we did with Big Psych, branching outside of us as a couple. Grassroots movements like ours are happening around the world. These small local community-based groups are educating, building, and networking across the globe to connect the mycelial network and liberate plant medicine and the people who commune with them. We've had the opportunity to connect with many of these amazing community leaders, and we plan to continue to collaborate, learn, and grow with one another. So if you take one thing from this presentation, let it be that there is no one way to experience psychedelics. The beauty is in their diversity and ability to honor diversity of thought, something we can take with us in everyday life, find value in, celebrate, and learn from. A lot of the work being done by these grassroots organizations around the world will actually benefit all of you, rather than myself or many of the folks currently in the space. Working outside of the medical model does not provide protection. There is one approach being recognized as legitimate and one monopolizing entity that tends to take control of spaces like these. Credentials on paper tend to override real-world experience, especially when it comes to legislation. We see the scientific community translate what is happening in the community into a palatable language, almost a form of gentrification. Some may say it is simply a natural evolution of growth and innovation. We then see them representing the community as a whole in tangible societal spheres such as lawmaking. Lawmakers lean on certain voices, and these voices direct the flow of our society. We ask that the legislative shifts happening in our community consider all sectors of the community and really view community voices as legitimate agents of knowledge and change. Big Psych will continue to evaluate the community as it evolves. Cultural conservation before the industrialization of psychedelics is a history we are currently experiencing, reflecting on the present and honoring the transformational times we live in. The legacy lives on. Thank you.